Did you know that for 11 years, a respected businessman terrorized an entire island while wearing a horrific spiked mask? In the 1960s, families across Jersey would lock their doors in fear of the beast. Edward Paynell was a pillar of the community by day, running his construction business and attending church. But by night, he transformed into something from a nightmare. He wore a grotesque rubber mask studded with nails and a dark cape, prowling the countryside like a medieval demon. Paysnell would study families for weeks, learning their routines, watching when parents left children alone. Then he would break into isolated farmhouses, attacking children while they slept. For over a decade, he used his respected position to deflect any suspicion. The entire island lived in terror, never knowing when the beast would strike next. His reign of horror finally ended during a routine traffic stop in 1971. Police found him wearing his full costume, complete with a nail-studded mask. The respected businessman had been Jersey's monster all along. Did you know that in 2018, a former spy was poisoned with the world's deadliest nerve agent on a quiet English street? Sergei Skripal was walking through Salisbury on March 4th, completely unaware that Russian agents had just painted his door handle with Novichok. For over a decade, this former GRU colonel had sold Russian secrets to British intelligence. He betrayed entire spy networks, passing classified documents through dead drops and coded messages. After being caught and imprisoned, Russia traded him in a spy swap, supposedly wiping the slate clean. He thought he was safe living quietly in England, but Putin never forgets. Hours after touching his door, Sergei collapsed on a park bench with his daughter, foam pouring from their mouths. The nerve agent attacked their nervous systems, shutting down their bodies piece by piece. Over 400 people were contaminated. An international crisis erupted. Both survived, barely, but the message was clear. Even retired spies are never truly free from their past. Did you know that in 2012, a man proudly demonstrated on television how he murdered over 1,000 people? Anwar Congo was once just a movie theater ticket scalper in Indonesia. But in 1965, the government turned him into something far more sinister. They backed him to lead a death squad that hunted suspected communists. Congo developed his own killing method using wire instead of knives to avoid bloodstains on his white pants. After each execution, he would dance to Elvis Presley music, celebrating another life taken. He recruited local gangsters and turned mass murder into twisted entertainment. The crew would laugh and joke while torturing victims before killing them. 50 years later, Congo showed filmmakers exactly how he strangled people, smiling the entire time. He felt no guilt, only pride in his efficiency. The Indonesian government still honors him as a national hero today. State-sponsored genocide had transformed an ordinary criminal into a celebrated mass murderer, and he loved every minute of it. Did you know that one of history's most notorious war criminals lived freely for 30 years after the Holocaust ended? In 1949, a man with a Red Cross passport stepped off a ship in Buenos Aires harbor. His name was Josef Mengele, but his documents read Helmut Gregor. At Auschwitz, they called him the Angel of Death. He had performed horrific experiments on twins, sterilized prisoners, and conducted surgeries without anesthesia. Now he was free, carrying medical equipment to continue his work in Argentina. The Vatican had helped him escape through secret routes, and Juan Perón's government welcomed him with open arms. He set up a rural medical practice and began experimenting on local patients. Genetic modifications, psychiatric torture, procedures that left victims scarred for life. Local authorities covered it up, protecting their Nazi guest. For 3 decades, Mossad agents hunted him across Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. He died in 1979, never facing justice. The Angel of Death had escaped punishment completely. Did you know that 8 men knowingly walked into a nuclear reactor to die and save the world? On July 4th, 1961, Soviet submarine K-19 was conducting sea trials in the North Atlantic. Suddenly, radiation alarms screamed through the vessel. The reactor's cooling system had completely failed. 139 men were trapped underwater with a nuclear meltdown just minutes away. The explosion would contaminate the entire North Atlantic and likely trigger World War III. 8 volunteers stepped forward, knowing exactly what awaited them in that reactor compartment. They entered the radioactive hell with basic tools, working frantically to repair the cooling pipes. Within minutes, they were vomiting violently, their skin burning and blistering from the radiation. Hair fell out in clumps as they welded new connections with their bare hands. They succeeded. The reactor was stabilized, disaster averted. But over the following weeks, all 8 men died horrible deaths. Their organs shut down one by one as radiation destroyed them from the inside. Heroes who sacrificed everything to prevent nuclear war. Did you know that in 2001, a man posted an ad online looking for someone willing to be killed and eaten? Armin Maiwes was a computer technician living alone in his family's old manor house in Rothenburg, Germany. He had spent years fantasizing about consuming human flesh. On March 9, 2001, his dream became reality when Bernd Brandes, an engineer, answered his advertisement. For months, they had exchanged emails planning every detail of the encounter. Brandes wanted to die and be eaten. Maiwes wanted to kill and consume. When they met, Maiwes filmed everything that happened next. First, he severed Brandes' body part, and they both tried to eat it together while Brandes was still alive. Then came the killing. Maiwes stabbed Brandes in the throat and watched him bleed out. Over the following months, he stored the body in his freezer and ate 20 kilograms of human flesh. He was only caught when he tried finding another victim online. This case shocked Germany and forced them to create new laws against cannibalism. Did you know a country doctor once convinced an entire nation he was literally a god of death? In 1957, François Duvalier was sworn in as Haiti's president, appearing as a mild-mannered physician. But Papa Doc, as they called him, had darker plans. He used ancient Vodou beliefs to control through supernatural terror, claiming he possessed mystical powers. His secret police, the Tonton Macoutes, wore dark sunglasses and carried machetes, appearing at night to drag people away. Public executions became routine. Severed heads were displayed on spikes as warnings. When President Kennedy opposed him, Duvalier claimed he cursed the American leader, then pointed to the assassination as proof of his power. At Fort de Manche prison, thousands vanished into underground cells, tortured with methods combining Vodou rituals and modern brutality. He declared himself Baron Samedi, the Vodou god of death, wearing black suits and top hats. For 14 years, an entire population lived in absolute terror of a man they believed could kill with supernatural forces. Fear became his greatest weapon. Did you know that in 1998, a journalist was burned alive in his car for exposing government corruption? Norbert Zongo was the fearless editor of L'Indépendant newspaper in Burkina Faso. For years, he had been investigating President Blaise Compaoré's regime, uncovering their darkest secrets. His latest investigation focused on the torture murder of the president's brother's chauffeur and drug trafficking within the Presidential Guard. The government responded with death threats, constant surveillance, and warnings to stop his work. But Zongo refused to back down, publishing one final explosive article about high-level corruption. On December 13, 1998, his car was found burned on a roadside outside the capital. Inside were 4 charred bodies, burned beyond recognition. Witnesses said his vehicle had been forced off the road by unknown attackers. They doused the car with gasoline, while the occupants may have still been alive. The flames consumed everything, erasing the evidence, but not the truth. His murder sparked massive protests across West Africa. Norbert Zongo became a symbol of press freedom, silence but never forgotten. Did you know that the world's most dangerous criminals live completely free on a Norwegian island? In 2007, criminologist Niels Christie walked into Bastøy prison and couldn't believe what he saw. Murderers cooking their own meals, rapists working as librarians, drug dealers managing the island's finances. No guards watching them. They carried keys to their own cells. This wasn't a minimum security facility. These were the worst criminals Norway had. Child molesters operated heavy machinery. Mass murderers ran environmental programs. They worked alongside civilian staff with zero supervision. The idea seemed insane. Give complete freedom to people who had destroyed lives. But something incredible happened. These monsters started changing. A child molester became the island's most respected carpenter. A mass murderer transformed into an environmental champion. The recidivism rate dropped to just 16%, compared to 60% in regular prisons. By treating the most dangerous criminals with complete trust, Norway created its most successful rehabilitation facility. Did you know that a failed musician once convinced over 100 people to burn themselves alive? In February 1993, federal agents surrounded a compound in Waco, Texas, where a man named Vernon Howell had transformed himself into David Koresh, a self-proclaimed messiah. For 51 days, the FBI blasted sounds around the clock, cut electricity, and used psychological warfare to break his hold on the Branch Davidians. But Koresh had spent years conditioning his followers through sleep deprivation, marathon Bible sessions, and sexual control over every woman in the compound. He claimed divine right to their wives, their children, their very souls. When negotiators tried to reason with him, he quoted scripture and spoke of apocalypse. On April 19th, tear gas canisters crashed through windows. Within hours, flames consumed everything. Audio recordings captured members choosing death over surrender, following their leader's final command. 76 people died that day, including 25 children. Religious manipulation had created America's deadliest cult tragedy. Did you know that America's top law enforcement chief waged a personal war against a grieving First Lady for over 20 years? In 1940, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally authorized massive surveillance against Eleanor Roosevelt. He created a 3,000-page file documenting her every movement, phone call, and meeting. Hoover saw her civil rights activism as a direct threat to his power. He tapped her phones, intercepted her mail, and planted informants in her inner circle. Agents followed her to speaking events, photographing her without permission. When surveillance wasn't enough, Hoover fabricated evidence linking her to communist organizations. Anonymous, threatening letters appeared at her home, postmarked from FBI offices. He tried sabotaging her work at the United Nations, spreading lies about America's most respected humanitarian. Even after Franklin's death, the harassment intensified against the widowed former First Lady. The surveillance continued until her death in 1962. For 22 years, Hoover used government resources to destroy one woman's reputation, all because she dared challenge his authority. Did you know that one man built an unstoppable war machine in his garage and terrorized an entire town for 2 hours? On June 4, 2004, Marvin Heemeyer welded himself inside his homemade armored bulldozer in Granby, Colorado. This skilled welder had spent 18 months secretly turning a Komatsu bulldozer into a fortress of steel and concrete. His muffler shop business was destroyed by a zoning dispute, and he blamed city officials for his financial ruin. The machine he created was nearly impenetrable, with gun ports, cameras for vision, and air filtration systems. When he began his rampage, police bullets bounced off harmlessly. Even explosive charges couldn't stop him. For 2 hours, he crushed 13 buildings, including the town hall, library, and homes of officials he held responsible. His killdozer seemed unstoppable until the radiator finally overheated. Trapped inside his steel tomb, Heemeyer ended his life with a single gunshot. It took 12 hours with industrial torches to cut through his armor and reach his body. One man's rage had paralyzed an entire community. Did you know a politician investigating child trafficking was found dead just days before exposing a massive government conspiracy? Georgia State Senator Nancy Schaefer had spent years documenting how Child Protective Services was stealing children for profit. She discovered CPS workers received financial bonuses for every child they placed in foster care. Reports were being falsified to remove kids from loving homes and sell them into the system. Nancy had names, documents, and evidence of officials involved in organized child trafficking. On March 26, 2010, she and her husband Bruce were found shot dead in their Habersham County home. Police immediately ruled it murder-suicide, claiming Bruce killed his wife then himself. But the evidence told a different story. Bruce had no gunshot residue on his hands. Nancy had defensive wounds on her arms. Her husband showed no signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. Just weeks before, Nancy had warned colleagues she feared for her life. She was preparing to release a comprehensive report exposing the entire network. The timing was too convenient to ignore. Did you know that a decorated war veteran killed 168 people, including 19 children with a single truck bomb? On April 19, 1995, at exactly 9:02 in the morning, Timothy McVeigh parked a yellow Ryder truck outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Inside that truck were 4,800 pounds of explosives made from racing fuel, diesel, and 330 bags of ammonium nitrate. McVeigh was a Gulf War hero, but the government sieges at Ruby Ridge and Waco had twisted his mind completely. He chose this target knowing there was a daycare center inside, calling the children collateral damage. For months, he planned every detail with his partner, Terry Nichols, viewing it as warfare against tyranny. When the bomb exploded, 9 floors pancaked instantly, crushing everyone inside. The blast was heard 55 miles away and left a crater 8 feet deep. 90 minutes later, police arrested McVeigh for driving without license plates. During interviews, he showed zero remorse, calling the attack necessary and justified. One man's rage became America's deadliest domestic terror attack. Did you know that one woman's blood literally poisoned an entire hospital emergency room? On February 19, 1994, Gloria Ramirez arrived at Riverside General Hospital in cardiac arrest. Nothing seemed unusual at first, just another emergency case. But then the medical staff noticed something strange. Her body gave off a sweet, fruity smell. When nurse Susan Kane drew blood, it reeked of ammonia and had an oily sheen covering Gloria's skin. Seconds later, Susan collapsed unconscious. Dr. Julie Gorshinsky rushed to help, but she too began gasping for air and fell to the floor. Respiratory therapist Maureen Welch started convulsing violently, her muscles completely paralyzed. One by one, 23 staff members dropped like flies. The entire emergency department had to be evacuated immediately. Hazmat teams discovered deadly dimethyl sulfone crystals in Gloria's blood that created toxic gas when exposed to oxygen. Gloria died from kidney failure, but the horror didn't end there. The exposed staff suffered permanent organ damage and severe neurological disorders for years. One patient had turned a routine emergency into a chemical disaster. Did you know that in 1965, an entire neighborhood watched a 16-year-old girl get tortured to death and nobody called for help? Sylvia Likens arrived at 3850 East New York Street in Indianapolis on July 3, 1965. Her parents left her and her sister with Gertrude Banashevsky while they traveled with the carnival. Gertrude seemed like a struggling single mother of 7, offering a safe home for $20 a week. But when the payments arrived late, everything changed. It started with slaps and cruel words, then cigarette burns pressed into Sylvia's skin. Gertrude carved words into the girl's stomach with a heated needle, forced her to eat waste, and invited neighborhood children to join the beatings. The basement became a torture chamber where dozens of kids took turns hurting her. On October 26, 1965, the final beating cracked her skull. Her last words were begging someone to help her. When police found her body, they discovered the most horrific child abuse case in American history. An entire community had stayed silent while an innocent girl was murdered. Did you know that in 1965, an entire neighborhood watched a 16-year-old girl get tortured to death and nobody called for help? Sylvia Likens arrived at 3850 East New York Street in Indianapolis on July 3, 1965. Her parents left her and her sister with Gertrude Banashevsky while they traveled with the carnival. Gertrude seemed like a struggling single mother of 7, offering a safe home for $20 a week. But when the payments arrived late, everything changed. It started with slaps and cruel words, then cigarette burns pressed into Sylvia's skin. Gertrude carved words into the girl's stomach with a heated needle, forced her to eat waste, and invited neighborhood children to join the beatings. The basement became a torture chamber where dozens of kids took turns hurting her. On October 26, 1965, the final beating cracked her skull. Her last words were begging someone to help her. When police found her body, they discovered the most horrific child abuse case in American history. An entire community had stayed silent while an innocent girl was murdered. Did you know the Soviet Union's deadliest serial killer murdered over 50 people while authorities insisted such crimes were impossible in their perfect society? In 1990, Detective Viktor Burakov discovered the 52nd mutilated body in Rostov Forest. For 12 years, children and young adults had been disappearing across the USSR. The killer was Andrei Chikatilo, a mild-mannered teacher and Communist Party member. He would lure victims to isolated train stations and forest areas with promises of food or money. Then he would stab them repeatedly, bite off body parts, and consume pieces of flesh while they were still alive. Soviet authorities refused to believe a serial killer could exist in their system. They blamed innocent men, covered up evidence, and denied the pattern entirely. Chikatilo's blood type didn't match crime scene samples due to a rare genetic condition. This kept him free to kill for over a decade. When finally caught in 1992, he confessed to 56 murders. He described the pleasure he felt hearing victims scream as he cut them apart. Soviet ideology had protected a monster, and dozens paid with their lives. Did you know that one of America's most notorious serial killers represented himself in court and nearly escaped justice? On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was strapped into Old Sparky at Florida State Prison. Outside, crowds cheered as the charming law student who had terrorized the nation for over a decade faced his final moments. Bundy used his good looks and fake injuries to lure victims, pretending to need help with crutches or a cast. He targeted young women who resembled his ex-girlfriend, gaining their trust before revealing his true nature. Over 30 victims across multiple states fell for his act. Even in court, he manipulated the system, representing himself and twice escaping custody. But bite mark evidence finally sealed his fate. At 7:16 that morning, after multiple electrical surges of 2,000 volts coursed through his body, he was declared dead. His execution ended a reign of terror that had captivated and horrified America. The charming mask had finally slipped forever. Did you know that one man prevented nuclear war while trapped in a metal coffin beneath the ocean? On October 27, 1962, Soviet submarine B-59 was dying in the Caribbean Sea. American destroyers dropped depth charges above them, believing they were under attack. Inside the submarine, Deputy Brigade Commander Vasily Arkhipov watched his crew slowly suffocate. Temperatures reached 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide was poisoning everyone aboard. They had lost all contact with Moscow. The captain was convinced World War III had already begun. The decision was made. Launch the nuclear torpedo and start the apocalypse. But Soviet protocol required all three senior officers to agree unanimously. Two officers said yes. Only Arkhipov refused. His fellow commanders screamed at him as men collapsed from heat exhaustion around them. Still, he held firm. No nuclear weapon would be fired. Instead, he ordered the submarine to surface and negotiate. That single decision saved hundreds of millions of lives. One man's calm judgment prevented the nuclear destruction of civilization. Did you know that American soldiers once discovered 84 frozen corpses of their own men executed in a snowy field? December 17, 1944, near Malmedy, Belgium. U.S. troops stumbled upon a horrific scene during the Battle of the Bulge. The killer was SS Oberfuhrer Joachim Peiper, Hitler's golden boy and the youngest regimental commander in the Waffen-SS. He had already butchered civilians across the Eastern Front, but this was different. Peiper's men forced captured American soldiers into an open field, then opened fire with machine guns. They mowed them down in groups, then walked among the bleeding bodies, shooting survivors in the head. After the war, Peiper escaped to Argentina, later living quietly as a car salesman in France. But Nazi hunters never stopped looking. 32 years later, French resistance fighters found him in a small village. On July 13, 1976, they surrounded his house and set it ablaze. Joachim Peiper burned alive inside, screaming as flames consumed him. His past had finally caught up. Did you know that in 1986, one Soviet leader knowingly sent thousands of men to their deaths to prevent half of Europe from becoming uninhabitable? Boris Yeltsin sat in his Moscow office in May 1986, staring at casualty reports from Chernobyl. The reactor core was still melting downward, threatening to hit groundwater and trigger a steam explosion 10 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Nuclear physicists warned him that without immediate human intervention, the molten core would breach containment within days. But the radiation levels were so high that anyone sent in would die within weeks. Yeltsin made the call anyway. He ordered the recruitment of liquidators, promising them safety equipment that didn't exist. Thousands of men were told they'd be heroes, not told they were walking into a death trap. He watched from his office as human wave after human wave was sent directly into lethal radiation zones. Each man condemned to slow, painful death by radiation poisoning, all to prevent a disaster that would have made half of Europe uninhabitable for centuries. The cover-up continued for years. Did you know that one man's denial turned a nuclear accident into history's worst nuclear disaster? Viktor Bryukhanov had managed the Chernobyl nuclear plant for 20 years, believing he oversaw the world's safest reactor design. At 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986, his phone rang with reports of an explosion. He immediately dismissed them as impossible. His reactor couldn't explode. For hours, he insisted the core was intact, reporting to Moscow that everything was under control. He ordered minimal evacuations and sent workers into lethal radiation zones without protection. When doctors begged for potassium iodide to protect nearby residents, he refused. He even insisted the May Day parade in Kiev continue as planned. Days later, he finally visited the site and saw the reactor core glowing bright blue through the destroyed roof. The reality hit him like a sledgehammer. Hundreds were already dying from radiation poisoning. His psychological breakdown was complete as he realized his denial had condemned thousands to death. One man's refusal to accept reality created the Chernobyl catastrophe. Did you know that one meeting in 1945 let a war criminal escape justice for millions of deaths? On September 27, 1945, General MacArthur sat across from Emperor Hirohito at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. The emperor had personally approved horrific experiments on living humans at Unit 731. Prisoners were cut open while still conscious, their organs removed to see how long they could survive. Thousands of women across Asia were forced into sexual slavery under his direct orders. Chemical weapons were dropped on entire villages, killing children and civilians. MacArthur had mountains of evidence proving Hirohito knew about every atrocity. Imperial documents showed his signature on orders for mass executions and human testing. But MacArthur made a deal: complete immunity in exchange for a peaceful occupation. All evidence was buried. Victim testimonies were destroyed. The architect of Asian genocide lived comfortably in his palace until 1989. While millions of his victims never got justice, he died peacefully in his sleep. One handshake protected a monster for 44 years. Did you know that Japan once turned an entire Chinese city into a biological weapons testing ground? On November 4, 1941, Japanese planes flew over Changde, China, carrying ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas. This was the first biological warfare attack in modern history. Dr. Shiro Ishii's Unit 731 had spent years perfecting these weapons using live human subjects. They bred millions of plague-carrying fleas and loaded them into specially designed fragmentation bombs. The target wasn't military, it was civilian populations. When the bombs exploded, clouds of infected fleas spread across the city. Within days, bubonic plague began spreading through Changde streets. Over 7,600 civilians died in agony. Their lymph nodes swelled to the size of eggs. Internal bleeding consumed their bodies, and organs failed one by one. Japanese researchers watched from a distance, documenting every symptom for future weapons development. An entire city became their laboratory, and innocent people became unwilling test subjects. The horror wasn't just the plague, it was the cold calculation behind it. Did you know that one woman became so deadly that the Nazis put a bounty on her head? In 1941, 25-year-old Lyudmila Pavlichenko was just a history student at Kiev University. But when Germany invaded, she volunteered for the Soviet army and became something terrifying. Armed with a Mosin Nagant rifle, she would lie motionless in no man's land for hours. Her specialty was hunting German officers and snipers, picking them off one by one. She learned to read muzzle flashes, wind patterns, and enemy movements like a predator. Her reputation spread through Wehrmacht ranks like wildfire, demoralizing entire units. German snipers began hunting her specifically, turning battles into deadly games of cat and mouse. Missing meant instant death in these duels. Her final kill came during the siege of Sevastopol. A German sniper had been stalking her for days. When she spotted his muzzle flash at 400 meters, she delivered a perfect headshot. By war's end, she had 309 confirmed kills, the deadliest female sniper in history. Did you know that one man turned an entire country into the world's largest killing field? On April 17, 1975, Pol Pot's forces marched into Cambodia's capital, Phnom Penh. What followed was 4 years of horror that would claim 2 million lives. Saloth Sar, once a Paris-educated teacher, had become the genocidal leader of the Khmer Rouge. His vision was simple but deadly: transform Cambodia into a peasant utopia by eliminating anyone educated. Wearing glasses meant death. Having soft hands meant death. Being able to read meant death. To save ammunition, victims were beaten with hammers, hoes, and bamboo sticks. Families were forced to dig their own graves before being clubbed to death. Children were turned into executioners, trained to kill without mercy. At sites like Choong Ek, Survivors described watching relatives beaten to death while skulls piled higher each day. Cities were emptied. Starvation became a weapon. An entire nation became a death camp. Pol Pot's utopian dream required the complete destruction of Cambodian civilization itself. Did you know one man hunted down over 100 Nazi war criminals after surviving the Holocaust himself? Simon Wiesenthal sat in a Buenos Aires cafe in 1960 studying a photograph of Adolf Eichmann. For 15 years, he had tracked the architect of the final solution across 3 continents. After surviving 5 concentration camps, Wiesenthal became history's most relentless Nazi hunter. He created card files on 90,000 war criminals, following paper trails and building networks of informants. He found Franz Stangl through a Syrian passport application and tracked down Karl Silberbauer, the man who arrested Anne Frank. But Eichmann was his greatest prize. Israeli Mossad agents had been watching Eichmann for months as he rode the same bus home from work. On May 11th, they grabbed him at the bus stop, drugged him, and disguised him as an El Al flight crew member. They smuggled him to Israel in a commercial aircraft. Wiesenthal lived with constant death threats, but his obsessive documentation brought justice to over 100 monsters. One survivor's mission became the world's conscience. Did you know 9 experienced hikers fled barefoot into -30-degree wilderness and died under the most mysterious circumstances ever recorded? In February 1959, search teams discovered a torn tent on Kholat Shakal Mountain in the Ural Mountains. Inside, they found the belongings of Igor Dyatlov's group, 9 seasoned mountaineers on a routine winter expedition. But the hikers were gone, and the tent had been cut open from the inside. Their bodies were found scattered across the frozen landscape, some nearly naked despite the deadly cold. The autopsy results were terrifying: crushed ribs and skulls with no external wounds. Ludmila Dubinina was missing her tongue and eyes, her chest caved in from massive internal pressure. Several corpses had orange skin and gray hair, despite being young adults. The final 3 bodies, found months later, showed severe radiation exposure. Their clothing contained radioactive contamination that couldn't be explained. Soviet authorities immediately classified the case for 30 years. The official cause of death was listed as an unknown compelling force. To this day, nobody knows what made them run. Did you know that one of America's most wanted fugitives was caught living like a king while controlling 10,000 people? In August 2006, FBI agents surrounded a red Cadillac Escalade on Interstate 15 near Las Vegas. Inside sat Warren Jeffs, the polygamous cult leader who had been running from the law for over a year. This mild-mannered former school teacher had transformed into the absolute dictator of the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He controlled every aspect of his followers' lives through so-called divine revelations. Jeffs arranged marriages between grown men and girls as young as 12 years old. He expelled hundreds of teenage boys from the community to eliminate competition for wives. His compounds in Utah, Arizona, and Texas became centers for trafficking minors across state lines. But the most disturbing evidence came from his own prison phone recordings. In these calls, he confessed to being a false prophet and described exactly how he manipulated his followers. His arrest exposed decades of abuse within America's largest polygamous sect. The man who claimed to speak for God had created his own personal hell on earth. Did you know that Japan once disguised a torture facility as a water purification plant? In 1936, General Shiro Ishii established Unit 731 in Harbin, Manchuria. To the outside world, it looked like innocent research. But inside, doctors performed live surgery on conscious prisoners without any anesthesia. They infected people with plague and anthrax just to watch them die slowly. Prisoners were thrown into pressure chambers until their eyes literally burst from their skulls. Others were spun in centrifuges at deadly speeds until their bodies gave out. They froze limbs solid, then tested different ways to thaw them while victims screamed. Organs were cut out of living people who begged for mercy. Over 10,000 innocent people were murdered in these experiments. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the Americans made a deal. They gave all the researchers complete immunity in exchange for their data. The same doctors who committed these horrors walked free and helped America build biological weapons. Justice was traded for scientific secrets. Did you know a man voluntarily got himself arrested to infiltrate the most horrific place on Earth? On September 19, 1940, Polish cavalry officer Witold Pilecki walked straight into a German roundup in Warsaw. He carried fake papers and let himself be captured on purpose. His destination was Auschwitz concentration camp, and this was all part of his plan. For 2.5 years, he lived among the prisoners, watching daily executions and medical experiments. But he wasn't just surviving, he was gathering intelligence. He smuggled out detailed reports about gas chambers, drew maps of the camp layout, and organized prisoner resistance networks. His messages reached London, providing the first real evidence of systematic extermination. The Allies didn't believe him. They thought it was propaganda. In April 1943, he escaped during a bread delivery, overpowering guards and fleeing into the night. He wrote a 100-page report documenting everything he witnessed. His voluntary imprisonment gave the world its first detailed proof of the Holocaust. Did you know the world's most wanted Nazi lived freely as a businessman for 40 years after the war? In 1983, French Nazi hunter Serge Klarsfeld finally tracked down Klaus Barbie in La Paz, Bolivia. The butcher of lion had been hiding in plain sight since 1945. During World War II, Barbie tortured thousands in his lion headquarters. He used electric shocks, waterboarding, and brutal beatings on resistance fighters. His most horrific crime was deporting 44 Jewish children from Iziu orphanage directly to the gas chambers. After the war, U.S. intelligence secretly helped him escape to South America. For decades, he lived as a successful businessman, even working with cocaine cartels. While his victims' families searched for justice, he enjoyed complete freedom. In 1987, Bolivia finally extradited him to France for trial. Survivors testified about his torture chambers, describing the screams that echoed through his building. He became the highest-ranking Nazi ever tried for crimes against humanity. Justice came 42 years too late, but it finally came. Did you know a psychology student used his own textbooks to fake insanity and nearly escaped execution? In December 1977, Los Angeles police found the naked body of Kimberly Diane Martin on a hillside. She was the 10th victim of the hillside strangler killings that had terrorized the city for months. Kenneth Bianchi was a security guard studying psychology, working with his cousin Angelo Buono. Together, they targeted young women, torturing them for hours before dumping their bodies on hillsides. It was psychological warfare against an entire city. When captured in Washington state, Bianchi claimed his alternate personality, Steve, committed the murders. He performed elaborate acts during psychiatric evaluations, switching between personalities on command. But doctors discovered he was using his own psychology textbooks to fake the symptoms. During confession tapes, he described in detail how they used electrical cords and ligatures on victims. He explained how he studied multiple personality disorder to manipulate the legal system. His failed insanity defense became a landmark case in criminal psychology, evil hiding behind fake mental illness. Did you know that a nuclear whistleblower was found dead just hours before exposing one of the biggest cover-ups in American history? On November 13, 1974, Karen Silkwood drove alone down Highway 74 near Oklahoma City. In her car were documents proving deadly safety violations at the Kerr-McGee plutonium plant where she worked. As a metallurgy technician turned union activist, she had discovered workers were being exposed to lethal radiation levels. For months, she documented falsified safety records and missing weapons-grade plutonium. Then she herself became mysteriously contaminated with plutonium poisoning. Plant management began threatening her as she prepared to meet a New York Times reporter. That night, her car veered off the road and slammed into a concrete culvert at high speed. When investigators arrived, all her documents had vanished from the wreckage. The autopsy found suspicious sedatives in her blood, but officials ruled it an accident. Her death silenced nuclear industry whistleblowing for decades. The safety violations she died trying to expose continued unchecked. Did you know a 14-year-old boy from Chicago sparked the entire civil rights movement with just one trip to Mississippi? In August 1955, Emmett Till traveled south to visit his relatives in Money, Mississippi. He had no idea how different life was there compared to his home in Chicago. On August 24th, he walked into Bryant's grocery store and allegedly whistled at a white woman named Carolyn Bryant. 4 days later, her husband Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Millam dragged Emmett from his bed at gunpoint. They tortured him for 3 days straight before shooting him in the head and dumping his body in the Tallahatchie River. When they found him, a cotton gin fan was tied around his neck with barbed wire. His face was beaten beyond recognition, his eye gouged out. At trial, both men walked free after an all-white jury deliberated for just 67 minutes. But his mother, Mamie, made one decision that changed everything. She held an open casket funeral, letting the world see what they did to her son. The photos in Jet magazine showed America the true face of racial violence. That image ignited a movement that would reshape the nation forever. Did you know the Soviet Union once tortured a Nobel Prize winner's wife just to silence his anti-nuclear activism? In 1984, KGB agents surrounded Yelena Bonner's Moscow apartment and dragged her into forced exile. Her crime? Marrying physicist Andrei Sakharov, the man who helped create the Soviet hydrogen bomb but later turned against nuclear weapons. They shipped her to the closed city of Gorky, where the real nightmare began. The KGB watched her every move, intercepted every letter, and denied her basic medical care for her heart condition. When she tried to visit Sakharov during his hunger strikes, they blocked her completely. During interrogation sessions, agents threatened to harm her children and grandchildren if she didn't convince her husband to stop speaking out. They staged car accidents around her, possibly poisoned her food, and isolated her from everyone she loved. The message was clear. Your family suffers until you obey. The Soviet state had weaponized love itself, turning marriage into a tool of control. Her punishment lasted years, all because she refused to abandon the man who dared challenge nuclear madness. Did you know that the FBI's most trusted counterintelligence agent was secretly selling America's nuclear secrets for over 2 decades? On February 18, 2001, Robert Hansen walked into Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia, carrying a bag of classified documents. He had no idea that FBI surveillance teams were watching his every move. For 22 years, this respected agent had been living a double life. By day, he hunted Soviet spies. By night, he was one himself. Hansen sold the identities of American assets working inside Russia. At least 10 of these brave operatives were executed because of his betrayal. He handed over America's most sensitive nuclear war plans for $1.4 million. The FBI called it Operation Lightning, their secret investigation to catch the traitor. As Hansen approached the dead drop location, agents surrounded him. The arrest was swift and brutal. 22 years of treason ended in handcuffs. His betrayal was considered the worst intelligence disaster in FBI history. One man's greed had compromised America's deepest secrets and cost innocent lives. Did you know that a former Eagle Scout and honor student became America's first mass shooter from a tower? On August 1, 1966, Charles Whitman climbed the University of Texas Tower, carrying a footlocker full of weapons. The night before, he had killed his wife and mother in cold blood. This former Marine had no history of violence, yet something had changed. At 307 feet above campus, he began firing at students below. For 96 minutes, he picked off targets like a trained sniper. 17 people died, 31 were wounded. Austin police officers climbed the tower stairs, knowing they were walking into a death trap. Officer Ramiro Martinez finally reached the observation deck. He found Whitman and fired 3 shots into his head at close range. The autopsy revealed something shocking, a brain tumor pressing against his amygdala, the area that controls aggression and fear. This discovery changed everything we knew about violence in the human brain. Did you know that microscopic fibers caught one of America's most notorious serial killers? In May 1981, 28-year-old Nathaniel Cater's body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta. He was the 28th victim in a 2-year killing spree targeting young African-American males. The city lived in terror, parents afraid to let their children outside. Then police got a break. Wayne Williams, a freelance photographer and aspiring music producer, was spotted on a bridge the night before Cater's body surfaced. What happened next changed criminal investigations forever. Forensic experts found 28 different types of microscopic fibers on the victim's clothing. Every single fiber matched materials from Williams' home and cars. Dog hairs from his German Shepherd were found on multiple bodies. The statistical odds of these matches being coincidental were astronomical. Survivors described how he lured victims with promises of music careers. Williams was convicted, and Atlanta's nightmare finally ended. Those tiny fibers revolutionized forensic science and proved that even the smallest evidence can bring justice. Did you know that one spy plane pilot was shot down from 14 miles high and it nearly started World War III? On May 1st, 1960, CIA pilot Gary Powers was flying his U-2 spy plane at 70,000 feet over Soviet territory. These reconnaissance missions had become routine during the height of the Cold War. At that altitude, Powers believed he was completely safe from enemy fire. Then a Soviet S-75 surface-to-air missile slammed into his aircraft. His ejection seat failed. He had to manually bail out, but it was too late. The Soviets captured him alive, along with all his classified spy equipment. KGB agents interrogated him for weeks, extracting every detail about American intelligence operations. When President Eisenhower lied about the mission publicly, the Soviets revealed Powers and his equipment. The international scandal was massive. Powers faced a show trial in Moscow and received a 10-year prison sentence. 2 years later, he was exchanged for a Soviet spy on Berlin's Glienicke Bridge. That single shoot-down changed Cold War espionage forever. Did you know an 18-year-old girl became one of World War II's most powerful symbols through her execution? In November 1941, Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya was a Moscow University student turned partisan fighter. She volunteered to conduct sabotage missions behind German lines during Operation Barbarossa. While attempting to burn enemy supplies in occupied Petroshevo village, German forces captured her. For hours, they beat her with rifle butts and leather belts, demanding information about other partisans. They stripped her partially naked and left her outside in freezing temperatures overnight. Local collaborators joined the torture, but she never revealed her real name or unit details. Instead, she shouted defiant speeches to villagers, calling them traitors to the motherland. The Germans decided to make her execution a public spectacle in the village square. As the noose tightened around her neck, her final words rang out, "You cannot hang all 190 million of us." Photographs of her tortured body spread across the Soviet Union, becoming powerful propaganda. She posthumously became the first woman awarded Hero of the Soviet Union during the war. Did you know that Stalin's most feared assassin spent 3 years planning a single murder with an ice pick? In 1940, Pavel Sudoplatov crouched behind binoculars in Mexico City, watching his target through a window. Leon Trotsky, Stalin's greatest enemy, had no idea death was coming. Sudoplatov was the NKVD's master killer, specializing in murders that looked like accidents. He had already recruited the perfect weapon, Ramon Mercader, a Spanish communist who spent years becoming Trotsky's trusted friend. On August 20th, Mercader entered Trotsky's study carrying a mountaineering ice axe hidden under his coat. As Trotsky read his article, Mercader raised the weapon and drove the steel pick 7.5 centimeters into his skull. Trotsky screamed and fought back, blood pouring from his head wound. For 26 agonizing hours, he clung to life with his brain exposed. When he finally died, Sudoplatov had perfected assassination as an art form. Mercader spent 20 years in Mexican prison, never revealing who sent him. The ice pick had silenced Stalin's greatest threat forever. Did you know that one man turned an entire nation into a prison using nothing but fear? In January 1959, Ramiro Valdez took control of La Cabaña fortress in Cuba. This colonial fort became the island's most feared political prison. As Che Guevara's enforcer, Valdez created Cuba's secret police from scratch. He personally oversaw the execution of over 500 political prisoners by firing squad. His torture methods were brutal. Electric shocks, mock executions, psychological warfare. He broke dissidents one by one, turning them against their own families. Valdez built the G2 intelligence service, a network of informants everywhere. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Children reported their parents. He exported these torture techniques across Latin America to other revolutionary movements. Female prisoners faced systematic abuse under his direct supervision. He perfected state terror as a weapon of control. Valdez created a police state that still exists today, built on the foundation of human suffering. Did you know one man killed over 500 Soviet soldiers in just 100 days using nothing but a hunting rifle? In November 1939, as Soviet tanks rolled into Finland, a quiet farmer named Simo Häyhä picked up his rifle and became history's deadliest sniper. He developed a terrifying hunting method. No scope, only iron sights to avoid deadly glare that would reveal his position. He packed snow in his mouth so his breath wouldn't give him away in -40-degree cold. For hours, he lay completely still in the frozen wilderness, waiting. Soviet officers started dropping one by one. The enemy called him the White Death. His reputation spread terror through entire battalions. They placed bounties on his head. But on March 6, 1940, an explosive bullet found its target. It tore through half his face, shattering his jaw and cheek completely. He fell into an 11-day coma, blood pooling in the snow. Somehow he survived. One farmer's precision had inflicted devastating losses on a superpower's entire army. Did you know a man casually demonstrated how he murdered over 1,000 people on live television? In 2012, Anwar Congo appeared on Indonesian TV and calmly showed viewers his wire strangulation technique. He wrapped the wire around a volunteer's neck, smiling as he explained how it left no bloodstains. Back in 1965, Congo was just a movie theater ticket scalper in North Sumatra. But when Indonesia's government launched mass killings of suspected communists, he became a death squad leader. He recruited local gangsters and turned murder into entertainment. After each execution, he would dance to Elvis Presley songs on the rooftop. The wire method was his signature. Quick, clean, efficient. 50 years later, he showed no remorse. Indonesia still honors him as a national hero. In filmed confessions, he described the satisfaction he felt during each killing, how the screams excited him, how power felt intoxicating. State-sponsored genocide had transformed an ordinary criminal into a celebrated mass murderer, and he was proud of every single death. Did you know that in 2006, a man was murdered with radioactive tea in the heart of London? Alexander Litvinenko, a former KGB officer turned Putin critic, walked into the Millennium Hotel on November 1st for what seemed like an ordinary meeting. He sipped green tea with his contacts, discussing Russian corruption and state secrets. Within hours, he felt violently ill. What he didn't know was that his tea contained polonium-210, one of the deadliest radioactive substances on Earth. Over 23 days, the radiation ate him alive from the inside. His hair fell out in clumps. His organs began shutting down one by one. He transformed from a healthy man into a dying skeleton, his body literally burning from within. On his deathbed, he accused Vladimir Putin directly of ordering his assassination. Forensic investigators found polonium traces throughout London, a radioactive trail leading back to Russia. His death sparked an international crisis, proving that even in exile, critics of the Kremlin weren't safe. The radiation had turned his own body into a weapon against him. Did you know that doctors once performed surgery on fully conscious prisoners just to watch them die? In 1940, deep in the forests of Manchuria, Japanese doctors at Unit 731 conducted the most horrific medical experiments in history. They called it research, but it was pure torture disguised as science. Prisoners were strapped to tables while surgeons cut them open without any anesthesia. The doctors wanted to see how organs function, while victims screamed and begged for death. They placed people in pressure chambers until their eyes literally exploded from their skulls. Others were deliberately infected with plague and dissected alive to study how the disease spread. Limbs were frozen solid, then shattered like glass to test frostbite treatments. Over 10,000 people died in these experiments, including women and children. When the war ended, American officials gave the doctors complete immunity. In exchange for their research data, every single perpetrator walked free. The victims got no justice, only unmarked graves. Evil disguised as medicine claimed thousands of innocent lives. Did you know that in the 1970s, dinner guests at a presidential palace were unknowingly eating human flesh? Ugandan dictator Idi Amin ruled through terror and madness, murdering over 300,000 people during his reign. But his darkest secret wasn't just the killing, it was what happened after. Palace staff later revealed that Amin kept human heads in his personal freezer. He believed eating his enemies would give him their power and strength. Kitchen workers were forced to prepare meals using human meat, mixing it with regular dishes. Foreign diplomats and government officials attended elaborate dinner parties, never knowing what they consumed. Amin would smile and watch as guests praised the unusual flavors. Beneath the palace, torture chambers doubled as butcher rooms where victims were prepared for consumption. The cannibalism became psychological warfare, spreading terror throughout Uganda as rumors leaked. Even his own staff lived in constant fear of becoming the next meal. When Amin was finally overthrown in 1979, investigators found evidence of his horrific dining habits. The monster who ruled Uganda had literally consumed his own people. Did you know an entire French village was burned alive in broad daylight during World War II? On June 10, 1944, SS officer Adolf Diekmann received orders to destroy a village as punishment for resistance activity. He chose Oradour-sur-Glane, where 642 innocent civilians were enjoying a peaceful Saturday afternoon. The soldiers arrived without warning and rounded up every person they could find. Men were forced into barns at gunpoint, while women and children were locked inside the village church. Then the killing began. Machine guns opened fire on the men trapped in the barns, mowing them down in seconds. But the worst was yet to come. The soldiers barricaded the church doors and set it ablaze with everyone still inside. Mothers held their children as smoke filled their lungs, and flames consumed everything. Only 6 people survived the massacre that day. The entire village was reduced to ash and rubble. Today, Oradour-sur-Glane remains exactly as it was left, a haunting memorial to Nazi brutality. Did you know one man pulled off the most impossible rescue in World War II history? On September 12, 1943, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny crash-landed his glider on a 9,000-foot mountain peak in Italy. His target was Benito Mussolini, Hitler's fallen ally, imprisoned in a hotel fortress that everyone said was unreachable. For weeks, Skorzeny studied aerial photos and handpicked his best glider pilots. The plan was insane: land on a rocky plateau, storm the hotel, and escape before reinforcements arrived. When his gliders touched down, Italian guards froze in complete shock. Not a single shot was fired. The facility fell in minutes. But the real terror began during the escape. Skorzeny crammed himself and Mussolini into a tiny Fieseler-Storch aircraft built for one person. The overloaded plane nearly crashed off the mountain cliff, barely clearing the rocks. When Hitler heard the news, he celebrated like a madman. Overnight, Skorzeny became Nazi Germany's most feared commando, the man who made the impossible look easy. Did you know a man threw himself a $20 million coronation while his people starved and he secretly ate human flesh? Jean-Bedel Bokassa was a French paratrooper who seized power in Central Africa in 1966. On December 4, 1977, he crowned himself emperor in a lavish ceremony that bankrupted his nation. But behind the golden throne lay unspeakable horrors. He fed political prisoners to crocodiles for entertainment and personally tortured enemies in his palace dungeons. Palace staff later testified about preparing human meals in his kitchen. Bokassa believed consuming his victims gave him their power and strength. When French forces finally raided his palace, they found refrigerated human remains stored like meat. The international community was horrified by the evidence of his cannibalistic practices. During his trial, Bokassa calmly described human flesh as delicious and nutritious. For over a decade, France had supported this monster while he terrorized his own people. The emperor who ate his subjects had finally fallen. Did you know one man holds the world record for the most executions in history? 7,000 people in just 28 nights? Vasily Blokhin arrived at Caton Forest in April 1940, wearing his leather butcher's apron and carrying a German Walther pistol. He was Stalin's personal executioner, a country boy turned into history's most efficient killer. Night after night, he worked 10-hour shifts in NKVD basement rooms, executing Polish officers one by one. His method was cold and precise. Each victim was led into a soundproof room, forced to kneel, then shot in the back of the head. He deliberately chose German weapons to frame the Nazis for his crimes. Between executions, he'd calmly clean his pistol and drink vodka to steady his hands. For decades, he carried out Stalin's orders without question, becoming a human killing machine. But the weight of 7,000 deaths eventually broke him. He descended into alcoholism, suffered complete psychological collapse, and died alone in a psychiatric hospital. Stalin's regime had created the world's most prolific executioner, then discarded him like a broken tool. Did you know that America secretly created the very terrorists who would later attack on 9/11? In July 1979, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski walked into President Carter's office with a shocking proposal. 6 months before the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, he revealed a secret plan to lure them into their own Vietnam. They would arm Afghan fighters called Mujahideen and provoke Soviet intervention. The CIA opened a massive weapons pipeline through Pakistan, recruiting fighters from across the Islamic world. Among them was a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden. For 10 years, America poured billions into training these holy warriors, creating what would become the Taliban. The strategy worked perfectly. 1 million Afghans died, and the Soviet Union collapsed. But the Mujahideen America arm didn't just disappear. They turned their weapons and training against their former ally. The same fighters who learned to build bombs from CIA manuals would later use those skills in New York. Cold War victory became America's greatest nightmare. Did you know a man survived 20,000 times the lethal dose of radiation and lived to regret it? On September 30th, 1999, nuclear technician Hisashi Uchi arrived for what seemed like another routine shift at Japan's Tokamura facility. He had no idea he was about to become the victim of the most horrific death in medical history. While processing uranium, workers bypassed critical safety protocols to save time. In seconds, a blue flash filled the room. The criticality accident had begun. Auchi absorbed radiation levels that should have killed him instantly, but somehow he remained conscious. Within hours, his chromosomes were completely destroyed. His skin began peeling off in massive sheets. His family begged doctors to keep him alive, ignoring warnings about his suffering. For 83 days, experimental treatments prolonged his agony as his organs shut down one by one. He suffered multiple cardiac arrests while pleading to be allowed to die. His skin grafts failed repeatedly as his body rejected everything. Radiation had turned him into a living nightmare that medicine couldn't fix.